Dan has seen plenty of change in his 31-year career in the brewing business. Over the course of the last 3 decades, he has come to understand the importance of patience while simultaneously developing a keen ability to analyze the marketplace, identify creative growth opportunities, and adapt to the current climate. Over the last 5 years specifically, Harpoon has embarked on a number of initiatives that underscore Kenary's knack for recognizing trends and acting on them. I'll let Dan talk about those specifically, but a few of them come to mind, and I'm sure you all know of them. An ESOP, a new beer hall, rebranded packaging, contract brewing, building a distribution business. These are all things that Dan has done to make sure that Harpoon is in a better position tomorrow than it was yesterday. So over the next half hour, Dan will walk us through the strategic thinking behind those decisions, share lessons learned from 31 years in business, and explain how established and regional craft brands can remain relevant amidst pressures from global brewing giants and nimble players alike. Please welcome to the stage Dan Kenary.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Chris, for that kind introduction and setting the stage for what I think is going to be a great day. And it is important to step back sometimes and take the big picture where we've come from into account as we kind of plot our course going forward. I guess when you hit 31 years, people finally think you have something to say. But I approach this in a very humble spirit. I'm surrounded by wonderful people at Harpoon who've helped me for a very, very long time. So, I think one of the things that's easy to do is romanticize the early days in the craft industry when people think, gosh, you guys had everything all to yourselves. There really was no competition. And you get shelf space or draft knobs at will because there weren't 5,300 breweries. And to some extent, a little bit of that is true. But the big thing is that nobody understood at all what we were trying to do. I heard it described earlier on something a couple of weeks ago. Someone said every call was a cold call. And that's absolutely correct. Again, it was very tough to raise money. Wholesalers turned us down right and left. No chains had any interest in carrying anything called microbrewed beer. There were very few U.S. equipment manufacturers of brewing equipment. There was one out in Portland, Oregon that we found. Difficulty getting ingredients. You couldn't have a tap room due to state regulations. And the biggest problem, and this is what we should be the most proud about in hindsight, is it was just generally accepted that American beer was boring, it was a commodity, and it wasn't that exciting, or in some cases, it really just wasn't that good. And taking the biggest picture into account, something we should all be incredibly proud of, is in 30 years we have created the most exciting dynamic beer industry in the world, where the rest of the world now looks to the US for inspiration for craft beer. Now, this is the world today, right? Success doesn't look like it used to for anybody. The warm shelf, the scary, scary warm shelf, as I call it. I was out last week in the trade down in Connecticut, and this is what keeps me up at night. And I'll tell you, one of the things, a clarion call I'd like to put out there, a challenge to the industry, and this is something that can unite all of us, from ABI on down to the newest craft brewer from this week, is the importance of code dating your product. When I was out there last week, 60% of the beers in the warm shelf did not have a code date on them. That's shameful. We make a perishable product that has a shelf life much closer to milk than it does to wine or spirits. And you get out there and you're a consumer and you look at that marketplace and you don't know whether your beer's in code or out of code. So I challenge everyone, clear, legible, consumer-friendly code dates. Brewbound's numbers itself here. 21% of microbreweries were down or flat in 2016. 36% of regionals were down or flat. Half of the top 50 were down or flat. So clearly the world has changed, and we at Harpoon certainly face some challenges as a long-established regional player in this industry. So if you would ask me, what's the biggest recent change? And I'd say it's the unprecedented pressure that we are getting now from all different sides within the craft world. From above, you have ABI, and it's in the stable of the craft breweries that they've purchased. Corona in its billion-dollar purchase of Ballast Point. Lagunitas with Heineken, Miller Coors, and so on. There's never been the kind of sustained pressure from above that we're seeing right now. From the side, wine, craft spirits, craft cocktails, FMBs, craft ciders. and from below, the next new thing. If you started your brewery in your neighborhood a month ago, chances are you're not the new shiny toy anymore. It's amazing how quickly those things change. Speaking of coming from above, micro brewing was established, if you will, as in rejection of big beer. And now we have the challenge of big beer kind of coming in hard into craft brewing. And what does that mean for the long-term health of our industry? What do we need to do to respond to that? Because we need to speak with our own voice in independent craft beer. We need to speak respectfully. We need to speak in a manner that it doesn't personalize things or that's not insulting. There's an awful lot that we're going to agree with our cousins, if you will, in the high-end group, for example, or at Lagunitas, even though they're owned by Heineken. But there are also some things that are going to be very, very different. And we need to be comfortable as craft brewers kind of speaking about that, because if we don't, no one's going to. And consumer confusion, in my opinion, only benefits the larger breweries, because if the folks are like, well, I don't know who owns what or what's independent, what's not independent, we've kind of lost that argument. So what can we do? Again, I think a relentless focus on quality, transparency, and the truth, respecting our consumers, okay? Again, code-dating our products. Be transparent about your ownership structure. Dive deep into your local communities. Be active in your local guilds and trade associations, and call people out if they're kind of representing themselves as something that they're not. Again, if you had all the marbles, you had all the resources, and you could speak however you wanted to speak, you would. We don't have all the marbles. We don't have all the resources. We're going to be outspent across the board. If we're not telling our story in the local press, the local media, through local relationships, nobody else is going to be telling our story. And remember, it's a long game, right? And the most important thing to do is to be authentic. So what I'd say, again, to folks that are new, is, in somewhat same vein, is that, people ask me about a good time to start a business. I'm maybe a little atypical in this. I think the best time to actually start a business is when times are tough. And so I would kind of caution folks that have started their businesses, the breweries in the last 5 years or so, be humble. Recognize that you've gotten into this industry at the best possible time in its history to start a new brewery, and that this is not an easy business. And I think that's the lesson I would say you should not have learned from the last 5 years, is that this is not an easy business. I think back to several of the breweries founded in the mid to late 80s, whose only challenge in their first 10 years, largely out in the Pacific Northwest, was to make enough beer to meet demand. And they kind of got that into their DNA. And those of us on the East Coast and other markets who had had the crap beaten out of us, you had to learn how to sell and market your beer as well. And so when time came and the slowdown hit in the 1990s, these breweries just kind of stumbled along because they didn't know what to do. And I think if you've been started in the last 5 to 7 years and you're good, and you're making wonderful beer and you're selling all you're making, that's great. You're doing a lot of things well, but recognize that you're also really very lucky too, and that times will change and it's going to get tougher. And again, I'll tell a brief story. When we started Harpoon, there were 2 breweries operating or getting started in New England, David Geary up in Portland, Maine, and the folks at Catamount in White River Junction, Vermont. In 1996, Catamount went and borrowed $4 to $5 million from friends, family, banks, et cetera, to build a new brewery in Windsor, Vermont, 10 miles south of White River, that we ended up purchasing from their bank for $1 million in 2000. So 4 years later, we purchased their brewery for 20 to 25 cents on a dollar. So things can and will change. So at Harpoon, what we've done in response to kind of the market, as Chris was talking about, is to really focus on what it means to be a brand. Beyond brewing great beer, which has to be a given for all of us in craft brewing, most important thing is your brand. We really didn't have to do this when we were smaller. The industry was a lot less complicated, but we really do today. As smart people know, smarter than me, brand work takes time, patience, focus, and discipline, which are 4 words I really wouldn't ascribe to the craft brewing industry on a natural basis. But, for Harpoon specifically, we need to stay relevant to craft consumers, right? And we also have to stay true to who we are. And so I want to just run through some things that we've done the last several years where we've tried to do that. In 2013, as Chris mentioned, we opened our beer hall. We've had a location 30 years in Boston that used to be a really crappy part of the city that has become a very attractive part of the city. And really, there's nothing more powerful, in our opinion, than direct interaction with our consumers, especially and ideally at one of our breweries. We also have a beer garden at our brewery up in Vermont. So it's what we call Love Beer, Love Life, which is our tagline in action. 25 different beers, growlers, crowlers, tours, tastings, yoga nights, X nights, beers and bites, Harpoon helps, et cetera, et cetera. We have thousands of people every week coming to see us. And arguably, if you've been to our location in Boston where we are, it's arguably one of the most visible craft brewery locations in the United States. Also in 2013, we installed a canning line. Again, increasingly the package of choice for kind of active Love Beer, Love Life craft consumers, environmental and quality benefits, and it gets our beer into more beer drinking occasions. And I have to say, in 2014, arguably the biggest and most significant thing we did was transition to employee ownership with the establishment of the Harpoon Employee Stock Ownership Plan. It gives us opportunities and responsibilities we wouldn't otherwise have. It goes beyond craft beer, we feel, to kind of some important societal issues. Among workers aged 23 to 34, according to a recently released National Center for Employee Ownership study, which is right in the sweet spot of craft brewing, that age group, workers who are employee owners have 92% higher median household wealth, 33% higher income from wages, and 53% longer median job tenure relative to those who are not employee owners. So truly something that's transformative, and it's a very topical issue: inequality, lack of opportunity, et cetera. I have to admit that I'm really surprised, having grown up in craft beer and heard an awful lot of talk over the years of community values, et cetera. It really surprises me and disappoints me that there are not a ton more employee-owned craft breweries. I thought there'd be every other week for the last couple of years, you'd be reading about another craft brewery selling to an ESOP as opposed to another craft brewery selling to a large brewery or private equity firm. So again, I'd kind of put that challenge out there to the industry as well. But what we're finding is that it really does resonate with our consumers, and it's a very clear demonstration of what our values are. Also, in 2015, we ramped up the business development strategic partnerships, investments in Barrel House Z, which was started by Russ Heisner, our first employee, our brewery we hired in 1986. It's a brewery on the South Shore of Boston. Latitude Beverage, we're in the wine business, but we're only in the wine business because they started their business. We gave them office space, which in what is now the bathroom of our beer hall, is where they started their company. I don't think they have that on their labels anyplace, but they're great guys, so we have a small investment in that. We've also started selling our beer in the UK, and as of last week, in Norway. We've also made a commitment. We've been in the self-distribution business really off and on since we started our brewery, but for the last 15 years in a row, and we've started to pick up some other brands, as you can see on the slide there, and we're hoping to grab some beers from the UK later on this year. Major work, as Chris mentioned, was a brand refresh. The Harpoon brand had been unchanged. I think like a lot of craft brewers, things were going well. We just didn't feel we needed to do that. But in 2015 and into 2016, we did really our first serious market research ever, and did a complete overhaul of Harpoon packaging and point of sale so that we could communicate to our consumers across all of our platforms with clarity and consistency. Our second brand is UFO, as many of you might know, which we started 20 years ago. We wanted to do an American wheat beer, but back then, if you can believe it, enough consumers kind of thought cloudy beer was bad and something was wrong with it. So we had concerns about it, so we decided let's put it into another line, the Harpoon, the UFO line. And for years, we've kind of gone back and forth on how closely to integrate that with Harpoon or not, and we've really finally decided UFO now is our #1 selling beer in 9 out of our 25 states. And we've never really given the brand much support or spoken with real clarity about it. So again, we did some market research, and we found out, hey, Harpoon consumers and UFO consumers are quite different from one another. Harpoon consumers are more craft conscious. They like to explore craft styles, discover new breweries. They're very social and enjoy drinking beer with friends, and are really comfortable in the whole craft universe, the lexicon, ABV, IBUs, et cetera, hop styles. UFO consumers are not craft connoisseurs. They're not very interested in the beer language of the category. They know what flavors they like, and they look for refreshments. They prefer hints of spice, fruit, or other new kind of exotic ingredients rather than talk about a lot of hops or bitterness. And again, we'd never found that out. And now in this marketplace, I think as craft brewers, we absolutely have to know these kind of things about our consumers. In addition, on the business development side, again, we've known the folks at Great Lakes for years. Pat and Dan Conway are friends, admired the way they run their business. We reached out to them last year when we heard they were thinking about canning and contemplating a large capital project, and said, guys, encourage you to do that, whatever you want, just know that we have some capacity. We've never been in the contract business, but if we could have a partnership with people we like and respect, we'd be happy to do that with you. And that's gone very well. So for us, what's next? It's kind of, Chris said, looking towards the future. It's continued product innovation. It's even more festivals, community involvement. Harpoon helps. We've done Harpoon helps forever. We raise hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a variety of charities all over New England. We just had our road race, raised $220,000 for ALS research with 5,000 runners. We run the largest single event for the Vermont Food Bank up in Vermont. It's just kind of in our DNA, and as craft brewers, this is what we can do. This is how we can be authentic and become part of our communities, right? Great beer drinking occasions. We're all about that. Love beer, love life. We have over 500,000 people a year who visit our breweries, and we also are exploring additional strategic opportunities. And again, hammering on that theme of employee ownership, that we're all in this together. We're charting our course for the next 30 or plus years, and our employees now have it in their hands to determine kind of where the brewery goes and what the brewery becomes, over that time. We've really tried to turn capitalism into a team sport, which is resonating with our employees and with our consumers. So I'll just end with a brief story about why, I love what I do so much. There are an awful lot of reasons. I've been very blessed to make my living in this industry. But I was leaving the brewery a couple of years ago it was a hot Friday, and there was a line out the door, people coming to the beer hall, which I always love to see that. And a woman walked up to me and said, hey, do you work at Harpoon? And I'm one of the oldest people there, so they think you must be in management or something like that. But she said, listen, I'm here. I love this place. I'm bringing some out-of-town friends to the beer hall. It's become an absolute must-visit place when we have friends coming to Boston, and we always have a wonderful time here. But she said, my ties to Harpoon go much deeper. I actually met my husband at one of your Oktoberfests in the late 1990s. We had only Harpoon beer at our wedding, and we've toasted the arrival of each one of our 3 kids with Harpoon IPA. And she started to thank me for the role that Harpoon has played in her life. And I just stopped her and I said, this is why I do what I do. Thank you for letting Harpoon be such a part of your life and really being such a motto of love beer, love life. So thank you all very much.
Over here. Thank you, Dan. That's a good story.
Thank you.
Have you toasted with Harpoon for all of the important moments in your life as well?
I sure have, and even some of the not so important ones. Everyone I can get away with. We're doing 16-ounce cans just for me, because my wife is kind of in this counting the number of beers I have mode, so I figured I can pull one off. Hopefully she's not watching.
So she doesn't count the ounces?
Not the ounces, not yet.
That's smart. I will make one note before I jump in here with some questions. If you guys have questions for any of our speakers today, you can email them to ask@brewbound.com or tweet us using the hashtag BBSession. You can also text to a number that I believe is printed on the agendas today. So everything should be there. Send up your questions, and we'll try to get them asked. So a lot of different projects over the last 5 or 6 years. The sort of first big one was obviously the beer hall, $3.5 million that you guys put into that project in 2012. How did you guys, I guess, know or understand that a tap room component of your business was going to be such a vital thing for the Harpoon brand, into the future? Because tap rooms have always been around and a part of the business, but they've really taken off in the last year or two. So you guys were a little bit ahead of the curve.
The only space at our brewery in Boston that has been used for the same purpose since we opened is what we used to call our tour room. On the east side of the brewery, it used to be our main entrance. Yep. Rich and I remember we painted, we knocked down brick walls, et cetera. So we'd always focused not only on brewing great beer. We wanted our brewery to be located in a very visible location. Those of you starting, you know how hard it is. It was a 6-month delay for us right after we started our company to get into the location we're at. The other one was some obscure office park about 10 miles outside of the city. And we were burning through our startup capital. It was not easy, but it was one of the greatest decisions we ever made because the whole city has kind of moved out towards us. So we always had this vision. We started with 5,000 square feet. We kept taking over space in our building, ended up with almost 50,000 square feet. And we had this idea that we wanted to bring more and more people down, and could we set up a communal-style beer hall, long tables. Oh, we only serve homemade pretzels. We're not trying to be all things to all people. And you know Boston, the touchy thing about Boston is, you know, once you open a beer hall, the retail accounts around you are like, screw you, why am I going to carry your beer? You're competing with me now, which makes complete sense to me as a Bostonian. I was out in Minneapolis last year, and people are like all carrying their local beers, competing with them, and because they're just way nicer than people in Boston are. But
I don't know what that says about me, but
no, you're from the Bay Area, that's all right. But this is one of the few projects we've ever done, and we've done a couple of house projects too, that actually came out the way that we hoped it would. Like when we were going through the design work of the beer hall, and the response has been outstanding. And people love to get together, meet friends over beer. It's a very simple but ageless recipe that works.
When you were going through that decision-making process, and you know any of the decisions that you made, be it the ESOP or the decision to rebrand, you know, I feel like specifically with the beer hall, you guys were a little bit ahead of the curve. Did you have any idea that tap rooms would be a thing that consumers would, you know, really, really appreciate and enjoy and want to participate in, like they are in 2015, 2016, and now in 2017?
All we saw was a steadily increasing number of visitors coming to both of our breweries. In Vermont, we had a beer garden that we added on. That's one a location you have to serve some food. And we just noticed the numbers were going every single year up and up in beer tourism. And given our location, we're 5 or 6 minutes from Logan Airport. We just saw people from all over the world, all over the country, and locals. And it's like, gee, there's something going on here with beer. There's just a buzz about wanting to visit breweries. So it seemed like a natural progression for us.
Yep.
I think the game changer on the smaller scales, when it became legal for people to do this, you realize, wow, you can start your brewery that way, and you can make the margins are so much better than you can have the resources and then buy a canning line or a bottling line and expand. We couldn't do that when we started. It's a much more attractive model.
Yeah. Well, and you know, in going through those moves, you add a layer of complexity to your business, or you change your business. So, you know, selling 48% of the company back to employees is something that changes Harpoon slightly. You know, adding a giant beer hall is something that adds a layer of complexity. Deciding to contract brew, you know, adding brands to your distribution arm and distributing for other brands. You know, these are all additional layers of complexity. So can you maybe walk us through sort of the decision-making process as you're thinking about, you know, moving into those areas and, in a sense, kind of making it more difficult for all of your employees to do their jobs?
I had to make them owners or they'd all leave. You're right, and you hear that and you're like, it's almost like a business school case of things you shouldn't do to take on that much complexity in your business. I think on the operating side, we were talking recently about the production schedule, you know, from 10 or 15 years ago versus a production schedule today, you know, when we were probably, you know, barely into the double digits in SKUs, and now we're double digits SKUs maybe just for IPA. Or it's crazy. It has become a much more complex business, and to not recognize that, and we didn't recognize it for years. You just keep saying yes to things, then you wake up one day and saying the system can't do this anymore. And so I think stuff happened when Rich left. I had two great partners that started the business with me, George Ligeti and especially Rich Doyle, who just left, you know, 3 years ago when we did the ESOP. And Rich and I managed business for many years, but then after Rich left and we did the ESOP, we really brought together a group of senior managers and middle managers to kind of take over specific roles. And we recognized that the industry is changing, the world is changing, and it is a much, much more complex business. But every once in a while, you do have to step back and say, can we do this anymore? Are we at a one in, one out type of thing? We just have to say no, and we've said no to a few things.
Yeah, and you talk about the business getting more complex, you know, over 5,300 breweries now. You showed the numbers of, you know, half of the top 50 being down, growth slowing. You know, we're sort of seeing a shift in the way that consumers just interact with all sorts of alcohol in general, and really moving to sort of an occasion-based approach to consumption. You know, sometimes it's a wine night, sometimes it's a spirits night. So, that's had an impact on the beer category as a whole. And, again, we sort of teed this whole thing up with, let's think about the future. Is it time to hit the panic button, or are we okay? Because there's a lot of gray skies out there right now.
There are a lot of gray skies. I think you go around to bars in New York or Boston, and you look around and see what people are drinking. It's shocking how little of it is beer. And that's a real concern. And we can't fixate on any one particular type of consumer, but trends tend to start in urban areas, and they're starting with younger folks, obviously, and we're not seeing the beer consumption that we would like to see. So we need to get our product in front of more of those people, and it's not going to be easy. It's one of the reasons we did the split with UFO. We think we can maybe do some things with UFO with some of those consumers we can't do with Harpoon. I think for beer too, for craft beer in the U.S., we should be talking more about imports. That's something that unites all of us. Imports, we started really because we thought it was ridiculous that the only way you could get different styles of beer back in the 1970s and 80s was to buy an imported beer that had been shipped for 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles away, environmentally unfriendly, it was old, it was stale, they were adding preservatives to it, etc. And we were incredibly proud when we started to see import numbers going down and craft going like this. And it's today, we just kind of accept the fact that imports are eating our lunch and not talk about it. It's crazy that people are buying imported beer. Beer's a perishable product. They're shipping it. Think of the environmental impact of it. So that's one thing. Again, I'm looking for things that can bring us together. I'd like code dating, and I think going after imports and talking about freshness and quality beer are things that unite us. But as far as going after those young consumers, I think we have to stop quibbling and start promoting different flavors of beer at different venues for different occasions, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's not just the sort of styles or you mentioned imports. It's not just the types of products that are being sold, but it's also, I think, the businesses themselves and what they look like and what they represent. So in your backyard in Boston, for instance, there are a whole number of breweries that have started up that are exploring that sort of direct-to-consumer model, offering a lot of New England-style IPAs, which are all the rage right now, obviously. And there are consumers in your backyard that are shifting away and going and really gravitating to those types of companies. How much more difficult has it made it for you guys just on your home turf, and what are sort of the biggest challenges that Harpoon faces in thinking about not the big guys but the small guys?
Yeah, it's staying relevant. It's a challenge because, and you hear this and you're like, and then you look in the mirror and you're like, wow, you are old. But that we are old and we've been around a long time. You hear people like, wow, you guys are really big, and it's like, yeah, I guess compared to whom? We're 1/20th the size of Sam Adams, so let alone the bigger breweries. But it is a challenge. Certainly, it's getting out and telling our story. I think employee ownership has helped with that. We just do an awful lot out in the community, and so we're present, we're active. People get to know us personally. But it's there. We also have great relationships with a lot of those folks. I'm very active, as you know, in the Brewers Guild and friendly with Rob Burns and the whole gang running the guild now, and so we try to stay right in the mix, and I think the best thing we can do is to keep being out there and letting people know who we are and what our story is.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, just the rapid expansion and the growth that's occurred over the last, 6 or 7 years or so. And something you mentioned to me when we spoke a few weeks back, you said that the industry has kind of shifted into a sort of flavor of the month mentality. And certainly consumers are driving a lot of that, but brewers are obviously responding and giving the consumers what they want. What are the pros and cons of this approach of sort of flavor of the month, new beer, rotation nation? And, what does, I guess, the industry risk as a whole by having this sort of herd instinct mentality, by just kind of following the latest trends and not remaining patient? Something that you sort of called out in your comments.
I remember when we were designing the beer hall, making decisions about the beer hall, it became very clear to us that it was important what we said no to as what we said yes to. I think from a brand perspective, the same thing holds true. It's as important what you say no to as what you say yes to, because those decisions reinforce or contradict what you're trying to stand for. And I do think there's certainly chasing of trends and trying to be the next new thing and getting out in front of that. you can kind of forget why you got in business to begin with and what you're trying to bring to the marketplace. So that, and I think in our industry, we talk an awful lot to each other, we read an awful lot about each other, and we probably need to spend more time with consumers and developing our own identity. I think I mentioned to you too, I think it's an interesting, I'm having a hard time getting my arms around exactly what the industry is going to look like in 5 to 10 years. I say when we started, beer was a commodity, which it was light yellow lager, you could have changed tap handles and people wouldn't have really known. And wondering if we're almost heading back to that stage, it's becoming so ubiquitous and so taproom focused, whether the beer is going to start mattering a lot less than the venue in which people are drinking it. It's like, oh yeah, my neighborhood, I like to go to XYZ taproom. I love it there. I don't really know what their beer is. I just get the lightest one they have or the pale ale or the IPA. And when I'm in Seattle, I go to that tap room, and it becomes a commodity again, but in a different way. And I think if we're not careful about how we brand, that could absolutely happen.
That's the location that's becoming the commodity.
Possibly, yeah.
Interesting. So we actually got a lot of audience questions here, so I'm just gonna.
I think we ran the clock out, shouldn't we?
Kind of rapid fire. Oh no, we got a few minutes.
Okay.
I know you're looking at the zeros there, but we got a few minutes. So
I haven't gotten into trouble yet, I don't think, which is good. So.
I don't think you've said anything that's going to make headlines quite yet, but maybe we can fix that. So these are, again, all from the audience. First question that we got was, what goes into your decision-making process when you're deciding to take on an expansion or a large capital project?
We're pretty disciplined from the financial perspective. We always have been. And it goes back to, we had some rough days in the late 80s and early 90s, and we learned, you got to really do your ROI, return on investment analysis on any project you're going to do. We have different criteria if it's something affecting the quality of the beer versus, just this would be more convenient. But we put it through a pretty rigorous analysis, and then we go out and get multiple bids, and we've got some really smart people at the brewery who've been doing this for a while now, so we kind of have a step process about making those decisions.
A similar question, are there any projects that you've taken on that you wish that you hadn't, and if so, how do you recognize what you needed to change or that you needed to change course, and how did you do that?
Oh yeah, we've made plenty of mistakes. Always I talk about flooring. I'll go back to projects our brewers have had about flooring that have never worked. But we've had some projects on the not filtration issues, pasteurization that didn't work out. We've made tons of mistakes over the years. We just try to learn from them and avoid doing them again. And we have a process where we talk about it openly. It's like you don't get nailed if you make a mistake. You should be making mistakes if you're learning, but we better be open about it and make sure we're learning for the future. We've made plenty of them.
Yeah. In a similar vein, another question we got was this idea of yes versus no when looking at opportunities. So you've said yes to a lot of different opportunities over the years in an effort to diversify your business. What have you said no to that you wish you might have said yes to in hindsight?
We had an opportunity in the cider business several years ago that we said no to that would have turned out to have been a nice opportunity for us that we didn't do.
In terms of an investment, or?
There haven't been too many others because we've been really focused on investing back into our own business. I think we've always taken the money and invested it back into the breweries and into the brands and been very happy to do that as opposed to kind of trying to get too far afield. And even the things we've been doing recently, like expanding the distribution business, those have been kind of minor expansions as opposed to wholesale going off in a different direction.
Sure, but you have made investments in other brands like Barrel House Z.
That's right.
So is that one area that you're sort of looking at for the future as, maybe strategic partnerships as another way to diversify the business?
Absolutely. And I think there are going to be tremendous opportunities over the next 3 or so years.
Interesting. Well, I will leave it with one final question. Obviously, we've been talking about, how much the industry has changed. You've got a lot of wisdom to share with our audience. So what's the best piece of advice you could give to both established and emerging brands today?
I think, it all gets back to the individuals in this room and the people behind the brands and the breweries. And it has to start there. You have to have values and determine that you're going to bring your values to your workplace every day. We had offers to sell our company to all types of different other breweries and private equity firms. And it's just, we decided not to do that. That was not consistent with our values. And, you spend a lot of your life at work, a ton of your life at work. and to not have pride or symmetry between your values and what what you're doing in your workplace, it doesn't work over time. So I'd like to think that in craft brewing, we not only have changed the industry into something absolutely wonderful in the United States, but we could also be a beacon, if you will, in this economy, which is inequality is a huge problem, lack of opportunity, that we could actually be a beacon on that and show that this is not just empty words, that there is actually another way to run capitalism that works for more than just a couple of owners or a private equity firm or something like that. So I don't mean to be on a soapbox about it, but I do care about it. We care about it at Harpoon. I'd love to think that there are a lot more folks in craft beer that do as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome. Thanks,
Cheers.
Chris.